are back. This is Quintus Curtius, and welcome back to the Fortress of the Mind podcast. And I'm very pleased to have with me today a very well-known figure in the mixed martial arts world, Carlo Prater, who is with us here from Brasilia, Brazil. Carlo, are you there?
Yes, sir. I sure am.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Carlo, we're really, really pleased to have you with us today and looking forward to a great discussion on a lot of different things. But You know, I guess the first thing I wanted to do was just to ask you to maybe tell us a little bit about yourself. You have a really unique background, and we were talking a little bit about that before we started recording here. And give it what was so you were born in Brazil, right? That's kind of what I understand, right?
Yeah, that's true. I was born in Brazil. My parents were American missionaries at the time,
Wow.
and yeah, so it's sort of like being an army brat or a military brat, Navy brat. You get moved around, every 2, 3, 4 years, and so I spent my early childhood up until I was about 7 years old. Here in Brazil, in Brasilia specifically, and then I moved to the United States and bounced around there. And then in 1998, when I was 17, actually when I was 16, I moved back to Brasilia and
Wow.
I finished up high school down here. And then in 2002, I went back up to the States and uh, lived there for several years, and then came back in 2006 and have been
Wow.
living here ever since. And I had a boy, and then I had another girl, and so I've been down here. This has been my home base for a while. I go back to the States about once or twice a year, usually
That's
for
great.
fights and training camps and stuff. So a couple times I've also gone just for family visits and to see old friends. I also lived in the States in 2009 all the
Wow.
way to the early part of 2011. I tried a stint working for my grandfather in Central Texas. So I've been back and forth from Brazil to the States several times over the last decade or so, but I've been living here in Brasilia uh, pretty much nonstop since about 2006.
Wow. Yeah, Brasilia, I've only been there once. I stopped at and it was, I wouldn't even say that I visited the city, but during a flight, I had to stop there at the airport, and it's just a very nice airport, man. I mean, just and the way the people talk there is noticeably different from how they speak in Rio, and I just thought that was. I've got to go and actually check out the place. I know, it's famous just for like government buildings and stuff, but I'm sure it's got a lot, just like any city, there's a lot going on there. Uh,
Yeah,
but
for sure.
yeah, but tell us, I'm always curious, when people are accomplished in a field like you are, you're certainly I mean, uh, you've been fighting for many years, and you've got just, a huge number of fights under your belt. How did you first get started in the martial arts world? Was it something that was introduced to you by somebody else, or did you just discover it on your own? I mean, walk me through that, how that happened.
Well, in 1993, early part of 1993, I was living with my dad in Texas, and he got a job offer in Oklahoma City, and we moved up there. And in 1993, I had my first interaction with wrestling. I went to the sixth grade, and to
Wow.
get involved in some sort of after school activity, I started wrestling. And of course, I was horrible because in Oklahoma, kids start out, they're 3, 4, 5, 6 years old doing pee wee wrestling. So I was getting pinned
Wow.
and slammed and fucked up. And, as is customary,
Oh yeah, like we
this
all did, right? Right.
Yes, of course. Anyways, I fell in love with the actual sport of wrestling, but then about 2 summers later, I think I was in the eighth grade, and I was on summer vacation, staying with some relatives in Texas, and I by chance saw some old VHS videos at a Hastings, one of those sort of magazine slash people used to rent videos back in the days, laser discs and videos and shit
Oh
like that.
yeah. Oh, I remember
Oh
those
yeah.
days well.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I stumbled upon the first UFC's Ultimate Fighting Championships, And of course, I right off the bat, I identified with little old skinny Hoist Gracie. You know, I'm sitting there thinking to
Oh,
myself, "Oh, this guy's Brazilian. I'm Brazilian," and just I identified a lot with that, and I sort of got hooked. And so when I went back for school that late summer to start the fall semester, I found the closest thing to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu academy that I could at that time, which was a judo school gym. This was in 1995 and late 1995, and I started training, and I haven't stopped since. And
that's great,
I've been
Carlo.
all, yeah, I've been all around the world training and fighting, and but it all really started because well, I had an interest in wrestling, but I'd say it all started like for a lot of guys in the '90s generation, just watching those first couple of UFCs, Hoist Gracie and some of the
Yeah.
early fighters. Marco Ruas was also instrumental in lighting that fire, in me. And I don't know. Over the years, I've found many trainers that I've worked with. They've just said that I'm different. That I'm a very competitive guy by nature. I was sort of born for this, and
Yeah.
honestly, there's got to be some truth to that. I mean, I'm either quite sadistic, or at some point, a little bit crazy or off to still do this.
No.
I love it so much. I just can't go a day without training. I love martial arts, and I love the discipline. I love everything about it, and
Well, it's such a
so
great it's such a, I mean, I'm not a practitioner of martial arts, Carlo, but
right.
I have such a high level of respect for guys like you who are, because I mean, what I can recognize is just its utility in life. I just recently just did an article yesterday on the armor, called the armor of virtue, and the one of the philosophers, the quote at the beginning, he actually went to a boxing match, and made an analogy of being able to take blows, to take hits, to take punches is just so important in life. And that's why I just think all guys should be uh, doing some form of contact sport. It's just so critical. Hello? Hello? Still there?
Yes, sir, I am.
All right. Hey, listen, let's pick up here where we left off. All right. So, again, guys like me who are just observers to martial arts, even we can recognize the real, or at least I can recognize the real value. And I know just what limited experience I have, just in the military, just the Marine Corps, just getting hit. I tell you, the world becomes a very different place once you take a shot to the face. So, theory, everybody has a theory about this or that. But when you get a pugil stick crashing against your head, that clarifies things in a way that all the verbiage in the world does not. and and
Exactly.
and suddenly you realize that you can't, there's certain things you can't fake, certain things in life you can't fake. And either you're gonna, and that's why I think there's so many, we talk about these weesh dudes out there, because none of them have ever had to test their bullshit. They can say whatever they want, nobody calls them on it. But you know what, if you're forced to take a position and defend it physically, suddenly you become a lot more polite, you become a lot more respectful, you become a lot more understanding. And that's why, like, one of the things I've noticed about fighters is they're some of the nicest people in the world, because they know that being a dick, it does nothing, it means nothing.
That's true.
And have you noticed that? I mean, what do you think?
Absolutely, absolutely, Quintus. It's like this. Fighting, the actual fighting itself. That's what I'm in it for. But over the course of my 20-year almost professional career, I've met the greatest of the great and the worst of the worst. I've met some horrible people who backstabbed and
Yeah.
just traitorous people. And then I've also met incredibly virtuous, simple, and noble people as well. So, it's sort of a microcosm of life itself. But let me tell you one thing that fighting has taught me is that when it's all said and done, it's not about if you win or if you lost a certain fight, but because at the end of it, there's I don't know, I'd say 0.0000001% of all actual prize fighters on earth are going to retire undefeated. And even if they were to do that,
Wow.
they wouldn't be the best. You're never going to be the best. It's about being your best. And there is no
Yeah.
true world champion because that's all so theoretical, you
Arbitrary.
know?
Yeah.
It's
It's
arbitrary and
yeah.
subjective and it's very theoretical. What we have to look for, we have to look for something greater. We have to be I have to treat each time I go out there, try to be a better prize fighter, be a better Carlo Prater fighter, the fighter, Neo Prater, each time I go out. It's not about trying
Yeah.
to win a world championship. How many incredible athletes or incredible combat athletes will never get their chance? Quite simply because they never had the right people to
Exactly.
introduce
It's
them to the
so
right people.
arbitrary, dude. Yeah. It's
It's
so yeah.
arbitrary. It's like life itself. So I think there's got to be a larger search in all this. It's not about getting popularity or even money, which would be great. I think that's what we're all in it for. At the end is try to do well for ourselves financially from this. But at the end of it, there's got to be a sort of a pride. The prize is got to be pride itself. You're proud of, you always went out there and you
Yeah.
did your best and you tried to put on the best performance, best fight you could each and every time and win your fights. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. But you know the
Yeah.
will has to be sovereign. The will to win, the will to
So
fight
great.
and
So
keep
true.
marching forward has to be the main motivation in this. It can't just be about the Benjamins or any of that shit, popularity or, quote unquote, a gold strap. I mean, some of these promotions nowadays are
Yeah.
making up divisions and making up championship bouts and everything. So it's just so arbitrary. It's sort of like
Yeah.
boxing is. There's at least four governing bodies that a person can claim that they are the world champion, and that's across 12 plus weight classes. So how many world champions in the world are there? There are numerous world champions. It's very
Yeah.
arbitrary. It's not about
Yeah.
that. It shouldn't be about that. It should be about being the best fighter that you can be, in regards to the way I look at my own personal relationship with professional mixed martial arts. But
Yeah.
martial arts in general, I think, are another great tool to, like your last article on Fortress was talking about Philo of Alexandria, how he likened, the combat arts and
Yeah.
pancratium to being a blacksmithing of one's soul. I mean,
Yeah.
once again, I'm going to go back to that quote from, Fight Club, one of the greatest all time dude movies in the world.
Oh yeah.
I'm a real big fan of David Fincher's work in that movie. It's just every time I watch it, I
It's
probably
so
watched it 30
subversive. It's so
times.
awesome. It's
Yeah, you
so
can pick
awesome.
up something in between the lines, and it translates to life so well. But one of the great lines in that film is, how much can you know about yourself if you've never been in a fight? And that's
Yeah.
that's symbolic in a lot of ways. A fight can be anything. It can be a struggle. It doesn't have to necessarily mean fisticuffs, but that's something that is lacking in modern day life for a lot of people. Things
Yeah.
have come along so quickly and progressed so quickly. I mean, hell, I was born in 81, and from 81 to about 1991, you know, I don't
Yeah.
know how much progress there was around me, but I didn't see it. And from 91 to 2001, there was quite a bit of progress. I remember getting on the internet the first several times in 1995 and
Yeah.
and looking up where the local jujitsu gyms were around me so I could start training. And sure enough, from 2001 to 2011, forget about
Oh,
it.
it's
Now
awful.
we're
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
now from 2011 on, it's just gotten ridiculous. So what am I trying to say with
Yeah.
that? It's we've got more tools and more comforts, more creature comforts than we've ever had in the history of human existence. But I think in a lot of ways, men have devolved. Not even
Oh
men,
yeah.
just
Absolutely.
humans have devolved because of our excess of comfort.
Right.
We
Exactly.
lack that struggle. We lack that that harshness of life. And I'm not to say that that's not to say that I'm one that I want to suffer. I'm just saying that a little bit of suffering here and there is
Right.
not a bad thing. It's actually a
No,
good
they need Carlo. I mean, we're on the same. I've been talking about this, for so many years. I mean, the moral, basically, it's moral corruption, physical degeneration, moral corruption, it's brought on by wealth, luxury, the feminization of society, the I mean, we
absolutely.
we joke about it on Twitter. You and I joke about it, and but soy and all. But these analogies, there, even though they may be said in joking ways, there's a real, obviously. I mean, we all know what the lesson is behind it. It's based on truth. And
Exactly.
we've got to shame guys into getting back in the ring and getting in there, getting on the mat. More good would come if they had their asses bounced around a goddamn dojo and got a bloody nose than all the theory and all the nonsense, all the internet drama in the world. And you know that, and I know that. And it doesn't matter, like you said, whether you win or lose. That's not the issue. The issue is that would cure so much of this nonsense that we see out there now. It
Absolutely.
really would. And it's a real crime what's being done to men in general, but to society, I think as well. It's because the price of this is going to be paid. We're seeing it. You're going to see it in your lifetime. uh, I'm going to see it in my lifetime. There's going to be a very, very high price, and we're gonna you're gonna what form it ultimately takes, we don't know, but there's going to be a very, very high price paid for all this.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the history of the United States of America, you have to think about, and I once again I go back to America because that's one of the things that binds you and I. We're both Americans,
Right.
and although I wasn't American born, I mean, you just talk to me for 20 seconds, you'll see I'm American through and through. But
Right.
and I'm proud of that. I've been an ambassador for America in a lot of ways over the last 20 plus years of my living abroad. I would hope to have been as good an ambassador as possible. But what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, if you look at the history of the United States of America and the way it was founded, the absolute struggle, the United States of America was formed from an idea. It was formed from an idealism. That's juxtaposed with Brazil, which was, for instance, just one of many the dozens, if not hundreds, of countries around the world that were then formed after the formation of the United States of America. But Brazil was formed for exploitation, and
Yeah.
the United States was formed for an ideal. There were people that were tired of, bowing down to the Anglican Church, and they wanted to,
Right.
worship as they seemed, as they deemed, necessary. And so, what did
Right.
they do? They packed up all their shit and they got in a couple of
Right.
spotty, shoddy ass, sketchy ass boats and went across the high seas of the most brutal of seas in the world, the Northern Atlantic, and they skipped across the pond and shit. They didn't even know where they were going to land. They just went on a
Yeah.
on a whim. They went off God's will. And I mean, if you just look at that alone, and then the first colonizers that stayed and didn't go back and didn't puss out, but they pushed on and they persevered, and they had to deal with pestilence and natives and even I mean all sorts of at this time in the 1500s, shit, 1500 looked up at the
Yeah.
heavens and said, you know,
Oh shit.
you know, oh, 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 oh how,
I
how,
think I think we're losing our
how,
connection here, man.
how are, you know, art thou has forsaken us, or I mean, we're trying, God, but you're just giving us,
Hey, can you hear me okay, man?
you know, you know,
Oh, good, good.
mosquitoes, and the natives are are are, are, are all.
Hey, Carl, one of the questions I was going to ask you, man, how did you get this nickname Neo or the One? There's got to be a story behind that. There's got to be a good story behind that.
Uh, Honestly, that is, you know, in 2002, I was, I went to Thailand in 2000, and then I went back a year later in 2001, and I was 18 and 19 respectively, and at that time. And when I came back to Brazil in 2001 after staying in Thailand for about 6 months, I came back and I started watching. I got right back into my usual routine of watching,
Right,
UFC and the big events that were going on at the time. And I saw this guy named Eve Edwards fight, and on a TV, in a UFC at the time. And I just was like, man, that guy's got the style. That's the kind of style I want to emulate and everything. And so I saw on the map that he was based out of the Woodlands, Texas, and that was close to where my mom was living at the time. So I took my mom up on an offer to go out there, and I hadn't lived with her since I was a boy, and she said she could, help me out finding a place and
right.
sort of set me up if I were to ever come. So I said, you know what, I'll take you up on it. So in 2002, I went up to the U.S. and first weekend I was there, I borrowed a car and I drove down to Houston, right outside of Houston, and I showed up at Eve Edwards' gym door. And at the time, there were still yellow pages, and I looked in the yellow pages in Houston,
Yeah,
and I and
right.
I saw where his gym was, and I called him up out of the blue, and he said, "Yeah, if you're interested, we got sparring today. Come on out," and this and that. And so I showed up. We sparred, and right from that day, he was like, he was all about me, man, and I was all about him, and he gave
Wow.
me that moniker Neo right afterwards. So that comes from Eve Edwards, yeah, the great Eve Edwards. He's fought in every
Nice.
single huge organization on planet Earth. He's one of the greatest fighters in the history of MMA, so far as I'm concerned. But he took me under his wing and sort of a mentor to me, and a trainer, training partner, and just an all around incredible person. But he
Great.
gave me that nickname in 2002. I really don't even know why. He was really big into the Matrix, as was I, but and the allegory behind it and everything. But
Right.
he was just like, you're the one, you're the one. So I don't
That's
know, it
great,
just
man.
stuck, and I've ran with it for what going on 17 years now. So
Yeah.
that's the story behind that.
Well, it's a great nickname, Carlo. Um, hello? Fuck, man. God damn it. Still there, man?
What I was trying to say earlier was, uh, I honestly don't see it getting any better before it gets really, really worse. The reason is because if you look at popular culture nowadays,
Yeah,
look at
yeah.
look at who are our quote unquote idols. I mean, look at
Right. They're
the
pathetic.
music coming out nowadays. It's
Pathetic.
it's just recycled beats and garbage singing.
No, it's
Okay,
awful. It's awful.
there is no musicality, there is no harmony, there is no original thought or creation going into any of the shit nowadays. It is just computer blips and bleeps and noises and shit.
I
And
know. I know.
listen, I love electronic music. I'm not bagging on that. I'm just saying the the
It
pop
has
bullshit.
no soul to it. It has no soul. It's empty, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Well, the pop bullshit that we are spoon fed by, even the big radio stations down here, playing fucking Miley Cyrus and
Uh,
Lady Gaga and these new male little soy boy dudes that are singers nowadays. I mean, if you look at the top 40, I mean, half of them are LGBT straight
oh,
up.
And it's
Not
just
even, I'm not even trying to, I'm not attacking anybody's sexuality, because I truly do believe that whatever goes on in your bedroom, that's your business. I'm
right,
I'm
right,
I'm libertarian as far as I'm concerned socially. I don't give a fuck about anybody else's sexuality. As long as you don't touch kids, I won't touch you.
right,
And
right,
I
right,
I don't give a fuck, honestly. I
right.
could care less about anybody else's sexuality. It has nothing to do. I am not a homophobe, never have been, never will be. But what I'm trying to say is we see a push nowadays,
Yeah.
okay, from huge corporations, okay,
To
pandering to the
denigrate traditional
rainbow.
masculinity, right? To denigrate.
Absolutely. And well, here's
I
the thing.
know. Oh,
The trans movement and the LGBT, apologists have been able to exploit a very, very important factor in their lust for social ascension, which is the
right.
marketplace. And you know what? You know what is a huge fucking market? Billions, literally billions of people on Earth. And if you look at it in a skewed LGBT way, if you turn them all gay or in some way, anti-family, well, you know what? They have a lot of expendable income to spend on shit that you can sell them. So that's why we see a lot of these corporations pandering to the LGBT, market, and we see that in pop music as well. We see this gender bending fucking horror
Right.
culture, twerking and
It's
just
yeah. Well, it just it ties
forward,
into
man.
all the
If you
it
look at
ties in.
Nicki
Yeah.
Minaj and Lady fucking Gaga and Cardi B or whatever the fuck, these fucking whores, man.
Yeah.
Listen, these are whores of
I know.
Babylon. And you know what I'm talking about. I'm not even trying to attack them personally. I'm just saying, look, their culture and what they are putting on the television, they're getting on their fucking knees, and then they're swagging their anus in everybody's face, and they're trying to make that as if
I
that's
know. I know.
that's
Normal. That's
beautiful
great.
and that's
No, I know.
creative
It
and
must be
that's
very.
brave. Fuck that.
Dude,
That's not
I
brave
know.
at all. That's the
No.
least
No.
form of bravery there is using your anus to try to, uh, 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 pander to other people who are
I,
very
Carlo,
susceptible
believe me,
to,
you would be.
popular culture. There's no limit to these people's degeneracy.
I know,
It's
you know
ridiculous.
that, Carlo. You would be surprised. I mean, you probably too young to remember this, but maybe not. But I mean, in the '80s, there was a time when the TV networks were controlled by three, and it was a big. You couldn't even use foul language. You couldn't even use foul language. Like if you look at some of the dating shows from like the '80s, like you couldn't even get into the specifics of what happened on a date. Like you couldn't talk about any. I mean, and now it's like you said, they're not, again, it's not about, there's a difference between tolerance and pushing stuff.
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
most people are just like you. Like they're like, okay, live and let live. I don't want to know. Do what you got to do. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to hear.
Non-invasive
But
libertarianism.
when they're making it where you have to endure, you have to love it. You have you
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
have
Fuck
you
that,
have to
bro.
you
Straight
have
up.
to you have to join along. You have to get on the bandwagon and praise these complete freaks. The average person is going to be like, hey, I didn't sign up for this, or what the hell happened here. I thought, I thought I could just, go with the flow, and I thought I could, but it's never enough. You have to then, and this is where I think most people, it's not enough. Like they want to abolish, and dude, it's getting worse because, and I've written about this. I'm even afraid they're going to start like going back and censoring old books
It's already started.
and trying
They,
to delete
they,
things,
they,
trying
they've
to destroy,
listen.
like
They've
wipe
torn
away.
down statues.
I
They've
know,
torn down
I know,
statues in the Carolinas.
right? They don't
Andrew
want you to know,
Jackson
right?
and even Jefferson's been attacked.
I know.
Listen,
They don't
you
even
start
want you
going
to
after
know
the
what
founding
happened.
fathers. You
I know.
start going after the founding fathers. That's straight up anti-American.
Yeah,
Fuck
where does it
that.
end? Where does it end? It never ends because right then you have to interpret every historical figure has to be interpreted through this lens of modern political correctness. And who's going to survive that
Unbelievable.
scrutiny? No one is going to be able to survive that. So it's a
Well, look,
way it's a
the
way
the
of
book
deleting history.
Well, you're right, brother. And I mean, look, I was reading your stuff when you were on Return of Kings. 4 or 5 years ago was the first time I started getting into the Return of Kings and a lot of other sites. But I saw a lot of your articles, and I really liked your return to neo stoicism and everything. But think about even like a guy like your acquaintance and your colleague Roosh. He's been attacked. I mean, left, right, up, down, front, back, probably to his financial betterment. It actually probably evaluated his brand more than anything. But at the same time, look, they've done digital book burnings of his already. We're not that far off, Quintus. Here in a bit, people will go and burn, quote unquote, digitally, literature that was written in times where
Right.
slavery was rampant, or traditional heterosexual gender constructs were the norm. People are going to start attacking that shit just because they're sick of fucking having to read about it in their
I
third
know. I know.
grade
I know.
history class. It's unbelievable, man. They're trying to rewrite history. Look, they're life imitates art, which imitates life itself. And a lot of these books that have been written over the last 100 years, really incredible books, namely Orwell and Huxley coming along with Brave New World in 1984, and then also Fahrenheit 451 was really good, talking about the book burning and how the most important and most powerful weapon of the populace, of the people, are ideas themselves. Well,
Right.
that's what they're coming after right now.
No,
We see them
there's
coming
no
after.
doubt. There's no doubt about it because it doesn't, because they don't, they don't want people to even have a historical memory, and
Unbelievable.
but look, we all know, it definitely gets people upset. Any normal person gets upset about. The question is, how do you deal? I think the best way to deal with it is kind of what we've talked about, is you've got to, especially if you have a son or a daughter, and you want them to grow up in a healthy, you've got to educate them on your own. The schools are, at best, are going to be, I mean, the best you can hope for from the public schools is just not to ruin your, you've got to do it on your own, because if you don't give them the education, the discipline, the character, they're not going to learn it. I mean, you've got to do it
Absolutely.
yourself, don't you think? I mean, that's
Absolutely. Listen, I have two children, all right, and my boy is 12, and I I've always made it a point to pay for his education. Here in Brazil, there's a very let me give you a little background. Here in Brazil, it's not that far off from the United States. It's not Common Core. Here, it's even a little bit more radicalized,
really,
in line with some Marxist precepts, mainly that were
wow.
distilled through some very famous educators on a national level in the 50s and 60s. His name was Paulo Freire, and he
Okay.
institutionalized across the Brazilian public education system this sort of leftist
Yeah.
resistance mindset. And I've always, since my boy was born in 2007, and he started going to school in about 2011, and I always made it a point to know we're going to private school this boy. And
Well,
in
that's good. That's good.
2013 we moved him to a Catholic school.
Well,
And
that's
the
good.
reason is, whether I'm Catholic or not, I absolutely identify with Christianity. And whether I'm a practicing Christian and baptized and all this and that, it doesn't matter. I identify with the precepts that are taught in
Sure.
the Bible and traditional Christianity. And let me tell you, if it weren't for that, I don't know what kind of son I would have right now. Thanks to that, though, I have the kind of son who can, I'll be, riding with
Right.
him in the car,
That's
and
great.
he'll nudge me in the side and point out to his right, and there's a little slew of little soy boys with some beers in
Yeah.
their hand, just sort of smoking some hashish cigarette over on the sidewalk, and he'll look at me and he'll just shake his head
They're
and he'll go,
lost.
soy, soja, and so
So,
I'm I'm red pilling a little boy right now who's going to make a difference in the world. And that's
that's
all
great.
that we can do. That's all that we can do. My little girl, I'm going to treat, I'm going to raise her in a traditional manner to where she doesn't have to, use her sexuality in any way, whether that's subversively or openly or anyway. She's just going to have to, use her own merits and not have to, get on all fours and look back at the camera and twerk that asshole, girl. Yeah, yeah. That's ridiculous. What kind of culture are people letting their kids watch on fucking MTV or on ABC, CBS, NPC at night? It's unbelievable. If I were in the States right now, I don't know what I would be doing because I, the thing is, your original question when we started this interview was, what are some of the things that you see happening in the States that you dislike? That's about it right there. This sort of mass undoing of the conservative, not even conservative, but the traditional precepts that were fundamental.
What sort of environment that your son and daughter are exposed to. That's the key thing. That's how that's how we're going to change things. We've got to put
Absolutely.
influences. We've got to get positive, good influence, good educational environments, good books. Good. We have to counteract the the negative, corrupt, degenerate environment that's out there with good things. There's no other way. I mean, because
Absolutely.
and even if it sometimes feels like it's a you're it's a a snowball against an avalanche. You've got to do something. You can't just accept it. You just can't accept it. There's a point at which I just said,
Absolutely.
I'm not gonna sit here and listen to somebody lecture me about how all these great historical figures are all evil and bad, and I don't accept that. I don't accept that. And we're not going to roll over
I don't either,
like
man.
the
And
boomers
that's the
did.
only way we have to.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
exactly. That well, see, here's the thing. Once again, we come back to that sort of analogy. Hard times make hard men, soft times make soft men. Well, the boomer generation, which is
oh, the
it's
worst.
being targeted more and more by funny ass people online
Yeah,
that are sort of anti-weesh and anti-soy. But you know, let me tell you something. There were a lot of good things that did come from the boomer generation, but the boomer generation, wanting to or not, they were the generation that literally did come from a very pent up, instinct for survival of the
yeah,
previous generation, which was war torn and which was, used to very dire straits at the very best. So the boomer generation came out, and all of a sudden, hell, there were white picket fences, and there were
yeah.
drive-throughs and poodle skirts and
All right.
and white walled tires and shit, car hops and
But then they
rock and
allowed in
roll and
all
Chuck
this other
Berry. Oh my
shit,
God,
right?
and then and allowed too much,
Too
allowed too
much. It
much,
went
and
too
that's when it
far.
went all downhill. And you've seen it's sort of that also that analogy of once you let the cows out of the corral, it's really hard to get them back in. Well, how
Yeah,
are we going to put, how are we going to correct these over corrections for previous, overzealous conservative, societal norms, which people construe, the up until the 1960s as America as being, so, Puritan and conservative. Well, how do we get back to that era? Now we just can't. You can't get the
yeah.
cows to go back into the
N- n-
corral. They're
Not
used to
until they
twerking
see the
now.
necessity of it. Well,
Okay, they
once
like
people get
their
there, yeah,
Xanax. They like their soy lattes,
yeah,
and they like their, hybrid vehicles, which don't carbon emissions whatsoever, because
right,
at the same time, you're cutting your carbon emissions, you're also consuming more fucking plastic and soy.
right,
So
right,
how is that making
right,
anything better? The whole thing is, man, it's just ridiculous that
right.
people have gotten so distracted from what is
Matters.
truly important in this in life, which is trying to be better people. Each one
Yes.
of us individually.
You trying to be a better Quintus, I'm trying to be a
Yes.
better Carlo. But if we get distracted and we put on the fucking,
It all comes
if
down
we
to
turn on the
character,
tube
man.
each day, the box. Well, exactly. There's a collective lack of character now in the
Yeah.
world,
Oh, I
and
know.
that's sad. It really. I mean, basically, resuming, what do my kids have? Who do they have as idols to look up to? When in the 80s
Yeah.
and in the early 90s, I looked up to, hell, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone,
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Clint
That's
Eastwood.
right. That's right.
Who are these kids looking at now? Ed
Oh, there's
Sheeran. What the
nobody. There's nobody.
fuck is that? What kind of soy is this? And Ed
Right.
Adam
Justin Bieber. Right.
Levine. I mean, what the
Right.
fuck?
I know.
Neymar Jr. I mean,
Man.
neck
So,
tats and piercings all through their body and Instagram accounts
oh,
and
man.
all this shit. That is cool nowadays. And if you're
Oh,
just, you're a run of the mill guy, you're a hard worker, and you do what you say you're going to do, and you're just a good person through and through. There is no
there's no reward. In
veneration to
fact,
you
you get
whatsoever.
punished for it.
There's no
You get
exactly
you get punished for it.
exactly.
Right.
So the peacock culture is just that's what young men have to look forward to. Those are their role models. Are fucking Instagram peacock soy boys. Are you fucking kidding me? This, I mean,
I know,
you
man.
talk
I
about
know.
taking a trillion steps back on the evolutionary scale. I mean,
Oh, man. It's gonna.
unbelievable, man. The people that my boy is 12 and he's extremely red pilled. I'm very proud of that. So he doesn't have these guys as as heroes. Like you'll say, Apollo, who's your favorite player on the Brazilian national team soccer? And he'll say he'll say somebody like Luis Firmino, a guy who's just sort of a hard worker, comes in,
Yeah.
he puts in his sprints, he tries to shoot at goal, but it's definitely not a peacock like Neymar Jr. And then if you say,
Yeah.
well, what about Neymar? He's no, that's awesome, Apollo, good job, little
Yeah.
Gen
Yeah.
Zer, totally fucking red pilled on life, looking at a peacock flailing around on the ground and on Instagram, fucking saying no. Oh, that's not a real jogador. The real jogador is quiet. He
Jogador.
doesn't have neck
Yeah.
tats and a $1
Yeah.
million car, but he's a good ball
Isso.
player, and he gets
Isso.
his own ass up off the pitch and runs back into the game and tries. So I'm happy at least that I'm doing the best I can in my little sphere of influence. But then I look outside and
Yeah.
I read international news and I look to the States and I see what's going on in the United States, and for all intents and purposes, it really pains me to say this, but it's almost sort of like on the verge of like a civil unrest because
Yeah. Yeah.
you've got this identity politics is just on everybody's, the tip
Yeah.
of
No, it's
everybody's tongue
poisoned
now,
everything.
and
It's definitely poisoned everything. It's poisoned everything. And you're right. You're absolutely right. And I think the only way it's gonna something's got to change. People are going to have to wake up, and it's going to happen one way or another. That's all there is to it.
people have to read classical literature, get
Yes.
back into the Stoics, Seneca, Cicero,
Yeah.
Dante,
Yeah.
Marcus Aurelius Meditations. These things have to be read and taught nowadays. But what are they reading now? Fucking
No.
Solomon, Frida
Soy.
Kahlo.
They're reading soy, Carlo.
Soy.
That's what
Well,
they're
not only
reading.
that, they're not even
Not reading at all.
reading. They're scrolling on fucking Instagram all goddamn day.
I
That's
know.
what's really disconcerting. And
Yeah.
so I don't know, man. Over the last several years, I've seen just virtual takeover of a collective, the West. And it's not only, I say the United States, but Brazil's no different. We're just on
Yeah.
a 5 to 7 year lag. Whatever's goes on in the States in about 3 to 5
It
years,
filters down there. Yeah.
maybe 7 at the most, it comes down to Brazil. I'll never forget when CrossFit started coming out in the U.S. in
Soy
2006
fit.
and 2007. I already saw that shit, and I come down here in 2011. I come back to Brazil, and all of a sudden I start seeing the first couple of boxes, CrossFit boxes, and
Yeah.
open up, and I'm like, well, ain't that some shit? And then, you know, I'll go you one better. Food truck culture. All right. In Austin, Texas, I used to go out and see my
More
sister when
like
I was
soy
living in
truck.
Houston on the weekends. Well, yeah, well, soy truck culture, that was a big thing. And they were great in Austin. You know, you could
Right.
eat really well for like $10, $15. And then, you know, 5, 6 years later, here, sure enough, about my first, you know, food truck I ever went to was like in 2003, 2004 in Austin. Sure enough, 2010, 2011, I'm down here in Brazil. I see the first couple of food trucks coming around, and I'm like, oh,
Right.
here we go. You
It
know,
happens.
topping.
It
So
happens.
it's
Well,
very
listen,
important for the U.S. for the U.S. to get its ducks in a row, because if it won't, Brazil won't, and the rest of the
yeah.
world just
No, you're
follows
right.
suit.
You're right.
So that's
Well, I
why
think
it's
it's going
so
to happen. I think,
important for
well,
the United States to take the lead. You know, the
it's going to
United States, as always, has to take the lead and has to do it right.
I think you're right. I totally agree with you, Carlo, and it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when and how. Hopefully, it can be done painlessly, but if not, it'll have to be done painfully. So it's going to happen
Absolutely.
one way or another. But listen, let's. It's been we're going to have to kind of wrap it up here. But it's
Sure,
been
bro.
great. It's been great talking to you, Carlo. I
Man, I
really
appreciate it, bro.
we have to do this again. We're going to do this again
For
because
sure, man.
you've got a lot to share here. So listen, keep the morale up. We got to stay positive no matter how negative the influences are. It's important not to lose hope and to stay positive and to stay in there. As you
Absolutely.
know better than anyone else, you got to keep fighting. You got to keep swinging, keep hitting him hard, keep getting in close, and keep after him. And Carlo,
Absolutely.
we will talk again soon. And ciao, cara. And we'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you so much, bro. I appreciate the opportunity, Quintus.
Okay, take care, Carlo. We'll talk soon. Bye bye.
Take care, bro.